She spent 3 years putting her own life on hold to carry someone else's weight until a broken washing machine and a spilled box of detergent made her realize she was the one who needed catching. Before we continue, please tell us where in the world are you tuning in from? We love seeing how far our stories travel. Harper Dalton was standing in front of a row of industrial washing machines at 8:30 on a Sunday night in a laundromat that smelled like fabric softener and bleach and something vaguely electrical, and she was so tired her vision was doing that thing where it kind of blurred at the edges and she had to blink hard to bring the coin slot back into focus. 31 years old, physical therapy assistant at a rehab clinic on the south side of Indianapolis, and she just spent the last 3 years watching her dad decline from early onset Alzheimer's while trying to keep him safe in his own home until it became physically impossible, and she'd finally moved him into an assisted living facility 3 months ago. Her apartment washing machine had given up completely that morning, just stopped mid cycle, and refused to drain, and she'd been at work all day dealing with post surgical patients and insurance paperwork. So here she was late on a Sunday night trying to wash the heavy winter blankets from her dad's old room because the facility said he could bring his own bedding, and she wanted him to have something familiar that smelled like home. The laundromat was one of those 24-hour places that existed mostly for people whose lives didn't fit into normal business hours. Fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, coin-operated everything, a vending machine in the corner that looked like it hadn't been restocked since 2012, and right now there were maybe 4 other people scattered around the space, all doing that thing where you pretend you're not noticing each other. Harper had claimed 3 of the extra-large front loaders and was trying to measure out detergent from the massive economy-size box she'd bought at the discount grocery store, one of those generic cardboard boxes that was supposed to last for months but was awkward to handle because the weight wasn't distributed right, and the cardboard got soft if you stored it anywhere, even slightly damp. She lifted it intending to pour carefully, and the entire bottom seam of the box gave way, cheap cardboard splitting, and the inner plastic liner tearing along the fold, and 15 pounds of powdered laundry soap poured out in one catastrophic stream all over her sneakers and the linoleum floor and the front of the washing machine. For a second, Harper just stood there, holding the destroyed box, while white powder settled in a cloud around her feet, and she could feel every single person in the laundromat turn to look, even though nobody said anything, and the exhaustion she'd been pushing down for weeks just completely swallowed her whole. She didn't yell or swear or make a scene, didn't even really react with anything that would register to someone watching. She just set down what was left of the box on top of the washer, walked 2 steps to the side so she wasn't standing directly in the pile of soap, and slowly sank down to sit on the floor with her back against the machine and her knees pulled up. She rested her forehead against her arms and just sat there breathing while detergent powder coated her shoes and her jeans and probably her hair, and the fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and somewhere in the background a dryer buzzer was going off that nobody was answering. She'd been running on maybe 4 hours of sleep a night for longer than she could accurately remember, and the last 3 years had been this constant cycle of work shifts and doctor's appointments and managing medications and cleaning up accidents and trying to keep her dad calm when he got confused about where he was or who she was, and then the guilt of finally admitting she couldn't do it anymore and moving him into care, and now the guilt of not visiting him every single day because she was just so completely drained she could barely function. Harper sat on that laundromat floor and felt the full weight of being the only person responsible for keeping everything together. And right now, she didn't have the energy to stand back up and deal with the mess she'd just made, so she just stayed there with her eyes closed, trying to remember how to take a full breath. She heard footsteps approaching, not rushed, just someone walking over, and then the sound of a door opening, the utility closet near the vending machines based on the direction, and Harper didn't look up because she genuinely could not handle someone asking if she was okay or offering unwanted advice about how to clean up soap powder. The footsteps came back and stopped near her, and there was this pause where she could feel someone standing there, and then the distinct sound of plastic bristles on linoleum, someone sweeping, and Harper finally lifted her head enough to see a man crouched a few feet away, pushing a worn-out push broom across the floor, carefully sweeping the spilled detergent away from where she was sitting. He was probably mid-30s, wearing faded jeans and a gray quarter-zip pullover that looked like it had seen a lot of wash cycles, dark hair that needed a trim, and he was just methodically sweeping the powder into a pile without making eye contact or saying anything, the kind of purposeful quiet that comes from someone who's comfortable with silence and doesn't feel the need to fill it with performance. Harper watched him work for a second, and her brain was moving too slow to really process what was happening, and when he'd cleared enough space that she wasn't sitting in a cloud of tide, he finally glanced over at her. "Some nights the laundry wins," he said, and his voice was low and even. Not joking exactly, but not pitying either, just stating a fact. You just have to let it. "I'm Sam, by the way." Harper blinked at him and realized she'd been sitting on a laundromat floor for probably 5 full minutes while a complete stranger cleaned up her mess, and she should feel embarrassed, but mostly she just felt this weird sense of relief that he hadn't tried to pull her up or fix her, or launch into some motivational speech about how tomorrow would be better. "Harper," she managed, and her voice came out rougher than she expected. "Sorry, my washing machine died and I've been dealing with a lot, and I didn't expect the box to just disintegrate like that." Sam nodded, like this was a completely reasonable explanation, and kept sweeping. "Yeah, these cheap boxes are terrible. The glue fails if there's any humidity at all. I switched to the liquid detergent in the pump bottles after I had one explode in my truck bed last summer." He stood up and walked the dustpan full of soap powder over to the trash can, dumped it, and brought the broom back to the utility closet, and the whole time Harper was still sitting on the floor, trying to make her body cooperate enough to get up. When Sam came back, he didn't offer her a hand up, didn't hover, he just leaned against the washing machine next to where she was sitting and slid down to sit on the floor too, which was absolutely not something most people would do in a public laundromat, but somehow made Harper feel less like a disaster. "I've got a bottle of the liquid stuff in my truck if you want to borrow some," Sam said, gesturing vaguely toward the parking lot. "I keep extra because my kid goes through clothes like he's training for a mud wrestling championship. You're welcome to it if it helps." Harper looked over at him and processed the "my kid" comment, noticed for the first time that 3 washing machines down there was a load running that had small baseball uniforms visible through the glass door, and there was a kid, maybe 9 or 10, sitting on one of those hard plastic chairs with his legs swinging, working on something in a notebook. "That's really nice of you, but I can just go buy another box," Harper said, even though the idea of getting in her car and driving to a 24-hour store right now made her want to cry. Sam shrugged. "Sure, or you could save yourself the trip and just use mine. It's literally sitting in my truck doing nothing. I drive a water treatment plant route during the day, so I've always got supplies. Hazard of the job." They sat there for another minute in weirdly comfortable silence, and Harper felt her shoulders start to come down from around her ears just slightly, and finally she pushed herself up off the floor, and Sam stood up too, brushing detergent powder off his jeans. "Okay, yeah, if you're serious about the detergent that would actually help a lot," Harper said, and Sam nodded. "Give me 2 minutes. Try not to have any more box-related disasters while I'm gone." And there was the smallest hint of a smile that made him look younger and less tired, and then he headed out to the parking lot. Harper watched him go through the big plate glass windows, saw him unlock an older pickup truck and pull out a blue plastic jug of Tide, and she turned back to look at the pile of blankets still sitting in the rolling cart and the destroyed box on top of the washer, and for the first time in weeks she felt like maybe the entire world wasn't resting on just her shoulders. Sam came back in and handed her the detergent without ceremony, and Harper measured out what she needed and got the washers started, and they ended up sitting in those uncomfortable plastic chairs, waiting for their respective loads to finish, and the conversation that developed was easy in that way that sometimes happens with strangers at odd hours when normal social rules don't quite apply. She learned he was 34, worked for the municipal water department monitoring treatment plants, had a 9-year-old son named Leo, who played baseball and had opinions about dinosaurs that could fill an entire encyclopedia, been doing the single dad thing for 6 years after his ex-wife decided she wanted to move to Colorado and start over without the parenting part. He learned Harper worked in physical therapy, had just moved her dad into memory care and was dealing with the specific guilt that comes with knowing you made the right choice, but feeling like you failed anyway, that she'd been so focused on keeping him safe for 3 years, she'd kind of forgotten how to have a life outside of caretaking. Around 9:30, Sam's washers finished, and he transferred everything to dryers, and Leo's eyes had started drooping by then, so he'd curled up on the plastic chairs, using his hoodie as a pillow. And when the washers buzzed, he woke up long enough to stumble over and lean against his dad's side while Sam sorted socks, and Harper watched this man navigate evening laundry with a half-asleep kid with the kind of practiced competence that only comes from doing something 1,000 times. When Harper's washers finally finished, Sam helped her move the heavy wet blankets to the dryers without being asked, just saw she was struggling with the weight and grabbed one side, and they worked in this quiet tandem that felt more like partnership than charity. By the time everything was dry and folded, it was almost 10:30, and they ended up walking out to the parking lot together, Harper pushing her cart and Sam carrying a laundry basket, with Leo trailing behind, yawning. "Thanks for the detergent," Harper said when they reached her car, "and for, sweeping and not making me feel like an idiot for sitting on the floor." Sam loaded his basket into the truck bed and opened the passenger door for Leo to climb in. "Everybody has nights where the laundry wins. You just happen to have yours in public. No shame in that," he said, and then he paused like he was deciding whether to say something else. "I'm here most Sunday nights around 8. It's the only block I can consistently get everything done before the week starts, so if you're around and need to borrow detergent or whatever, I'll be the guy folding tiny baseball pants in the corner." Harper felt something warm unfold in her chest, not attraction exactly, more like recognition, like she'd just met someone who understood what it was like to build your entire schedule around someone else's needs and still barely keep your head above water. "I might take you up on that," she said, and she meant it. She was used to being the only one holding everything together, used to managing and fixing and carrying the weight of everything alone, because that's just what you did when people depended on you. But Sam hadn't asked her to stand up until she was ready, and somehow that one small thing made all the difference. Sunday nights at the laundromat became something Harper didn't realize she was looking forward to until she caught herself checking the clock at work, wondering if Sam and Leo would be there when she showed up. And it wasn't romantic exactly, more like she'd stumbled into this weird, unspoken alliance with someone who understood that some weeks you're just trying to keep clean clothes in rotation and yourself approximately functional. The second week she arrived around 8:15, and Sam's truck was already in the lot, and when she pushed through the door with her rolling cart, he looked up from loading a washer and nodded like they'd made actual plans, instead of just running into each other on a Sunday night in a public laundromat. Leo was at one of the folding tables with a math worksheet spread out in front of him and a mechanical pencil he kept clicking obsessively, and he waved at Harper with the enthusiasm of a kid who'd been told he had to finish homework before he could play games on his dad's phone. Harper set up her machines and ended up drifting over to where Leo was sitting, mostly because the alternative was staring at her phone for 40 minutes, and her brain was too fried for that to be anything but depressing. "What are you working on?" she asked, and Leo looked up with this expression of pure suffering that only a 9-year-old doing homework on a Sunday night can achieve. "Long division. I have a quiz Friday and I keep messing up when there's remainders," he said, and Harper pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. "Okay, you want the boring way or the trick way?" And Leo perked up immediately, because kids always want the trick. She showed him the finger method for the nines times tables and a couple of mnemonic devices her dad used to use with her when she was in elementary school, back before his brain started failing him, and Leo actually got excited about math for maybe the first time in his life, and Sam wandered over at one point with terrible coffee from the ancient drip coffee maker in the corner and just watched them work with this soft expression Harper pretended not to notice. The third week, Harper's laundry cart developed this horrible squeaking sound from the front left wheel and kept pulling to the right like a grocery cart with a vendetta, and she was trying to muscle it across the parking lot when Sam appeared next to her and said, "Hold on a second, I've got a wrench in the truck. That's just a loose axle nut." He came back with an actual toolbox, the kind that had organized compartments and wasn't just a random collection of screwdrivers in a plastic bag. And he flipped the cart on its side right there in the parking lot under the security light and tightened down the wheel assembly while Harper held her laundry basket and watched him work. "You just carry tools everywhere," she asked, and Sam shrugged without looking up. "I work maintenance routes. If I don't have basic tools with me, I end up needing them. Learned that the hard way about 1,000 times." He tested the wheel, spun it a few times to make sure it was secure, then flipped the cart back upright and rolled it in a circle. "That should hold, but if it starts acting up again, there's probably a bearing issue, and you'll need to replace the whole wheel. They sell them at the hardware store for like $6. They fell into this rhythm over the next month, where Harper would show up Sundays around 8, and Sam would already be there, and they'd do their laundry in companionable silence, or sometimes Leo would need help with homework, or Sam would notice something broken on Harper's cart, or her jean jacket zipper that kept sticking, and he'd just fix it without making a production out of it. They'd drink the absolutely terrible coffee from that ancient drip machine that tasted like it was brewed with water from a rusty pipe, and they'd talk about the specific exhaustion that comes with being responsible for keeping another human being alive and functional when you're barely managing it for yourself. Sam told her about the guilt of Leo's mom leaving and wondering if he'd somehow failed at being a good enough partner to make her want to stay, about the impossible math of single parent logistics where he was always either at work or with Leo, and there was never time for anything else. Harper told him about the slow, horrible process of watching her dad forget who she was, about the afternoon he didn't recognize her and called her by her mom's name, about moving him into the facility and feeling like she'd abandoned him, even though logically she knew she'd done everything possible. One Sunday in late April, Harper was folding towels and mentioned she'd visited her dad that afternoon, and he'd been having a good day, remembered her name and asked about her job, and her voice got thick talking about it, because the good days were almost harder than the bad ones. They reminded her of everything that was being slowly erased. Sam was sorting Leo's socks into pairs, and he said quietly without looking at her, "You know you're allowed to be sad about it. Without feeling guilty that you're sad, grief doesn't stop being real just because you made the right medical decision." Harper had to turn away and pretend she was very focused on her towel folding because nobody had given her permission to feel sad without justifying it. Everyone kept telling her she was so strong and doing such a good job, and she should be proud, and she was tired of being strong. She just wanted to be sad and have that be okay. Things were almost approaching something Harper might cautiously label as friendship when she got the call on a Thursday afternoon in early May while she was between patients at the clinic. The assisted living facility director's number showed up on her phone, and Harper's whole body went cold before she even answered because they didn't call unless something was wrong. Her dad had fallen in his room trying to get to the bathroom alone. They'd called an ambulance as protocol required, and he'd been checked at the ER and cleared with no fractures. But he'd been extremely agitated after returning to the facility and was refusing to let the staff help him and kept asking for someone named Dorothy who'd been dead for 15 years. Harper left work early and spent 4 hours at the facility trying to calm him down while he looked at her like she was a stranger trying to hurt him, and by the time she got home that night, she was so completely hollowed out she couldn't even cry, just sat on her couch in the dark, staring at nothing. The guilt came crashing in over the next few days. That voice in her head that said if she'd just tried harder, she could have kept him home. If she was a better daughter, she'd visit more. If she was stronger, she wouldn't be falling apart over something that was nobody's fault. She started avoiding people, stopped responding to texts from coworkers asking if she wanted to grab lunch, declined her cousin's invitation to a cookout that weekend, and when Sunday came around, she couldn't make herself go to the laundromat because the idea of having to be functional enough for small talk made her want to crawl out of her own skin. She'd been re-wearing the same 2 pairs of scrubs, washing them in her bathtub with the hottest water she could stand and antibacterial soap, knowing it wasn't ideal, but telling herself it was temporary, and next week she'd get to the laundromat. But next week came, and she still couldn't do it, so she just kept the minimal rotation going and avoiding the pile of laundry accumulating in the corner of her bedroom. 2 weeks after the fall, Harper was sitting on her bathroom floor at 11 p.m. hand-scrubbing detergent into a shirt collar when her phone buzzed with a text from Sam, first message he'd ever sent outside of their Sunday routine. Hey, you switch your laundry day, or did you find a working machine for your apartment? The message was casual, no pressure, just checking in, and Harper stared at it for a full minute, trying to figure out how to respond. She typed and deleted 4 different versions before finally sending, I'm drowning right now, Sam. I don't have the capacity to be a good friend or a good anything. I'm sorry. And then she put her phone face down on the tile and went back to scrubbing her shirt, even though her hands were getting raw from the detergent. The message sat on red for 3 minutes before Sam's typing indicator appeared and then disappeared, appeared again and disappeared again, and then nothing. No response. And Harper told herself that was fine. She'd successfully pushed away another person, which was apparently her specialty lately. What she didn't know was that Sam was sitting in his truck in the employee parking lot at the water treatment plant on his lunch break, had just pulled out his sandwich when her message came through, and he'd read it twice trying to figure out the right words to send back. He started typing, You don't have to apologize, but deleted it. Tried, I'm here if you need anything. But that felt empty and performative. And finally, he just set his phone down on the passenger seat and sat there for a second, running his hand over his jaw, trying to think. Sam had spent 6 years learning how to read what people needed versus what they said they needed, because Leo would say he was fine when he missed his mom, or say he wasn't hungry, when really he was anxious about a test, and Harper's message wasn't saying, Leave me alone. It was saying, I'm scared of being a burden, and I don't know how to let people help. He wrapped his sandwich back up and put the truck in gear, pulled out his phone, and sent a quick text to his sister, who helped with Leo pickups as part of their standing arrangement, asking if she could grab Leo from school and keep him for the evening. And then he drove to the hardware store on the east side and walked in with a purpose, because if Harper thought being a mess disqualified her from deserving help, then someone needed to show her how wrong that was, and words weren't going to do it. Action would. Friday evening came in gray and damp, one of those May rainstorms that wasn't dramatic enough to be interesting, but persistent enough to make everything feel heavy and tired. And Harper was sitting in her apartment with all the lights off at 7:30, folding the same bath towel for the 4th time, without actually processing what her hands were doing. She'd called in sick to work that morning, even though she wasn't physically sick, just couldn't make herself function enough to be responsible for other people's recovery when she was barely holding her own pieces together. And she'd spent most of the day on her couch, staring at her phone, wondering if she should call the facility to check on her dad, or if that would just make the guilt worse. The pile of dirty laundry in her bedroom had gotten big enough that she'd started rewearing scrubs and just spraying them with fabric refresher, which she knew was disgusting, but the alternative was going to the laundromat and potentially running into Sam and having to explain why she'd gone radio silent, and she didn't have words for that conversation. A soft knock on her apartment door cut through the sound of rain against the window, and Harper's first instinct was to just not answer, pretend she wasn't home, but then whoever it was knocked again, quieter this time, patient, and she forced herself up off the couch and walked to the door in her socks. She looked through the peephole and her breath caught because Sam was standing in the hallway in his faded canvas work jacket with water dripping off his hair, and he was holding something, but the peephole distortion made it hard to tell what. Harper's hand hovered over the deadbolt, and every instinct she had was screaming to not open the door, to not let him see her like this with unwashed hair and the same clothes she'd been wearing for 2 days, but she'd already been standing there long enough that he probably heard her on the other side, so she slowly turned the lock and pulled the door open. Sam looked at her, and his expression didn't change. Didn't do that thing where people's faces shift into pity or concern. He just stood there holding a battered blue plastic laundry basket that Harper recognized as hers from the laundromat, the one she'd left sitting next to the dryers 2 weeks ago when she'd bailed halfway through her wash cycle because she couldn't handle being in public anymore. The basket was full of clothes, her clothes, and they were folded, actually properly folded, in that neat way that takes effort. T-shirts with the sleeves tucked in, and jeans stacked with the seams aligned, and Harper felt her throat close up looking at it. Sam, what? She started, but her voice came out rough, and she had to stop and swallow hard. What are you doing here? You left these at the laundromat a couple weeks back. Sam said, and his voice was even, conversational, like this was a totally normal thing to do on a Friday night in the rain. I grabbed them that same night before the staff cleared them out, finished drying them, and they've been folded in my truck since then, waiting for me to figure out where you live. He shifted his weight slightly, and water dripped off his jacket onto the hallway's worn linoleum. I remembered you mentioned once you lived near the Greenway Trail, and Cambridge Court is the only complex in that area, so I took a chance. Someone was leaving when I got here and held the door, checked the mailbox directory in the lobby, and found your unit number. Harper gripped the doorframe hard enough that her knuckles went white, and she could feel her pride fighting with her exhaustion and her desperate need to not be alone, and the pride was losing but still putting up a fight. She looked down at the hallway floor, at the water tracking in from outside, anywhere but directly at Sam's face, and she swiped quickly at her eyes with the back of her sleeve. I told you I'm too much right now, she said, and her voice came out thin and shaky. You shouldn't be here. You've got Leo to worry about and work and your own life. You don't need to be dealing with my mess. Sam was quiet for a second, and then he took one step forward, not into the apartment, but close enough that he could set the laundry basket down just inside her doorway. And he didn't crowd her or try to push past, just placed it carefully on the floor and straightened back up. I dropped Leo at my sister's place after work, told him we'd hang out tomorrow to make up for it. He's fine. He's teaching her kid how to build something complicated with Legos and eating pizza. This isn't taking away from him. He kept his voice low and incredibly steady, the same tone he'd used that first night in the laundromat when he was sweeping detergent off the floor, calm and grounded and completely without judgment. And yeah, I've got work and my own stuff. Everybody does. But that doesn't mean I can't carry a laundry basket to your apartment when you're having a rough week. Harper felt tears starting for real now, and she pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes, trying to stop them, because she'd already cried more in the past 2 weeks than she had in the entire previous year, and she was so tired of falling apart. I don't know how to let people help me, she said into her palms, words muffled and broken. I spent 3 years being the only person holding everything together for my dad, making every decision, managing every crisis, and I got so used to carrying all of it that I don't know how to put any of it down, and now he's in a facility and I should feel relief, but I just feel guilty and like I failed, and I'm supposed to be the strong one, the capable one, and instead I'm sitting in the dark, folding the same towel over and over because my brain won't work right. She heard Sam move, and when she dropped her hands, he'd stepped just barely inside her apartment, still giving her space but present, solid, real. Harper, look at me for a second, he said quietly, and she forced herself to meet his eyes, even though hers were red and wet and probably a disaster. You've spent 3 years carrying everyone else's weight, managing your dad's entire life while he was forgetting his own, working full time, making impossible medical decisions alone, and you kept all of that going until it literally wasn't safe anymore. That's not failing. That's the definition of strength. He gestured to the laundry basket sitting between them. But strength doesn't mean you have to carry everything solo forever. It doesn't mean you're not allowed to have hard weeks, or need help, or sit in the dark when things get too heavy. Harper's face crumpled, and she wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hold it together, but Sam kept talking, his voice steady and sure, like he was stating facts that couldn't be argued with. I'm not asking you to take care of me. I'm not asking you to manage my life, or fix my problems, or be responsible for whether I'm okay. I've got that handled. Leo's got that handled. We're good. He took a breath, and his expression softened into something that made Harper's chest ache. I'm just asking you to let me help carry the basket, literally and metaphorically. Let me fold some laundry and fix your squeaky cartwheel and show up when you're drowning, because that's what people do when they care about each other. They share the weight. The tears came harder, and Harper couldn't stop them anymore, just stood there in her doorway crying while Sam waited patiently, and when she finally got enough breath to speak, she said, I don't want to be a burden. I don't want to be another responsibility on your list. Sam shook his head firmly. You're not a responsibility. You're a person I like spending time with. There's a difference. I look forward to Sunday nights because folding laundry with you is better than folding it alone. Leo asks about you, wonders if you're going to help him with his math homework. You're not taking from us, Harper. You're adding to our life. And it's okay to need help sometimes. That doesn't make you weak or a burden. It makes you human. Harper wiped her face with both hands and looked at this man standing in her apartment hallway, holding space for her to fall apart without trying to fix her or make it stop hurting, just offering to stand next to her and carry some of the load, and something in her that had been wound impossibly tight for years finally started to loosen. I don't know what to say, she managed, and Sam smiled just slightly. You don't have to say anything, just maybe don't disappear for 2 weeks next time things get hard. Send me a text. Let me bring you terrible coffee. Let me sit with you while you fold the same towel 17 times, whatever you need. 6 months later, Harper was back at the laundromat on a Sunday night in November, and things with her dad hadn't magically gotten easier. He'd had more falls and more bad days, and there were weeks where he didn't remember her at all, but she'd stopped treating that grief like something she had to carry alone in silence. Sam was standing at the folding table next to her, working through a load of Leo's hoodies, while Leo sat cross-legged on top of a running washing machine, showing Harper his latest drawing, something involving dinosaurs and spaceships that made perfect sense in 9-year-old logic. Sam passed Harper a shirt to fold without looking. This routine they'd developed over months of shared Sunday nights, and Harper took it and folded it, and then leaned her shoulders softly against his arm. This small, casual contact that meant everything. Meant I'm here. Meant you're not alone. Meant we're carrying this together. She'd learned slowly over those 6 months that letting someone help didn't mean giving up control or admitting weakness. It just meant you didn't have to do everything solo. And Sam had never once made her feel like a project or a responsibility. He just kept showing up, kept folding laundry, kept fixing broken things, kept being steady and present, and exactly what she needed without her having to perform or pretend or manage his emotions on top of her own. Leo finished explaining his drawing and hopped down from the washing machine to go check on the dryers, and Harper watched him go and then looked at Sam, who was already looking at her with this soft expression that made her feel seen and safe. Thank you, she said quietly, for showing up that night, for not letting me disappear. And Sam bumped his shoulder against hers gently. Always, he said simply, and meant it. Maybe love isn't about grand gestures or sweeping someone off their feet or rescue fantasies where one person saves another from their life. Maybe it's just about grabbing a broom when their world spills apart and quietly choosing to stay, about folding someone's laundry when they can't manage it themselves, about showing up on a rainy Friday with a basket full of clean clothes and the message that their hard days don't make them too much to care about. Harper had spent 3 years putting her life on hold to carry someone else's weight, and she'd convinced herself that being strong meant doing it alone. But Sam taught her that real strength looks like letting someone stand next to you and share the heavy lifting, and that's the kind of love that actually lasts. If this felt real to you, there's more like it here.